Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. So I often get the question asked on this channel, CP, are you a Doomsday Prepper? And do you think that it's crazy to be one if you are? Now I'm going to try to comprehensively address this query. And in order to do so, I'm probably going to have to go off on a lot of different wild tangents. So hopefully this isn't a 20-minute video. Maybe it'll be a 10-minute video. Who knows? But it's a difficult question to answer. There is a lot of crazy in the preparedness community. Don't get me wrong. Anybody with sensibility can see that. And I don't even like using the word crazy, because crazy is a term which kind of throws the baby out with the bathwater, if you know what I mean. There's a lot of legitimacy to the claims of the quote-unquote Doomsday Prepper, the person who is explicitly open about their intent to prepare for the end-all of all days. At the same time, in order to be a person of the preparedness mindset, there has to be a bit of wisdom there. And I'm not just talking about the 72-hour prepper. And I would argue that even the 72-hour prepper, on an unconscious level, in the back of their mind, if you're a 72-hour prepper, you're also entertaining the possibility. Maybe it's just, 1% of your preparedness, but you also entertain the possibility that things could hit the fan in a big way, in a long-term way, and you would be forced to fend for yourself. There's a certain wisdom this day and age of realizing that at any time you could be thrust back into full-on self-reliance. And there's a certain anxiety and fear that comes with that, with knowing that at any point in time there's a variety of different factors which could lead to the dissolution of civilization as we know it, the breakdown of society, the breakdown of rule of law, all of the social conventions that we share, and the technology that we've evolved throughout the years, at any point could really be pulled from under our feet. It's not just that, though, that it takes to be a Doomsday Prepper. It's a recognition of the fact that in spite of this veneer of civility, this very thin veil of civility which has been placed in front of us to give the illusion that man is not an animal. It's very easy this day and age, when you look at the people on the magazines, when you look at the people in the shopping mall, to just presume that all of that animalistic nature has been systematically bred out of man, that it's a thing of the past. But it does take a certain wisdom to recognize that in the absence of all of this order, this system, that people would go crazy. Now, some people stake their whole life around prepping for the full-on grid-down scenarios, which I think is probably a little much, but who am I to really judge? You can define crazy in a variety of ways. It's a relative term. One of my favorite quotes is, "It's no measure of health to be well adapted to an insane society." And, you're going to get a variety of different opinions as to what's sanity and what isn't. Lots of them are going to be politically and religiously charged. But I'm just talking about the sense that from a rational standpoint, you have people who dedicate their entire spare time to focusing on their favorite sports team. You could argue that it's insane to stake your entire existence, or at least a significant portion of it, on something like sports that has really no actual repercussions for you. It's a form of nationalism, patriotism, regionalism. It's a very tribalistic mentality, us versus them mentality. Our team's better than your team. Even though all the players on the team, you have absolutely nothing in common with them. They all come from different areas of the country, possibly different countries altogether. So the notion of that in itself could be construed as crazy. A lot of things could be construed as crazy, the way that people pursue various different types of happiness. So is the Doomsday Prepper, who has all this disposable income, building a castle in the woods for one very small potential outcome, are they crazy? I suppose the only measure of it would be the impact on your life and those around you. Now, if you're putting yourself into obscene amounts of debt in order to prepare for this one possibility, then it could be argued that it's not a very rational decision to prep for that. I wouldn't go as far as to say that it's necessarily crazy, because as I said, don't be fooled when you go to Costco and you see the food stacked sky high. Just remember that all of that food is gone and replaced every few days. It's very easy to think that with all the new technology coming out, with all the new skyscrapers they plan on building and the new infrastructure that they plan on building, it's very easy to think that this is just going to go on and on forever, and it very well may. But the fact is, if it didn't, and if something were to happen, if technology were to fail us, the technology that keeps us alive, we live in a life support system. The cities are incubators for human beings. That's what I like to view them as. Western civilization is essentially a giant incubator that's keeping us alive, we the domesticated hominids. And if somebody ever pulled the plug, a lot of people are going to perish. I might even be one of them. Just because you're a prepper doesn't immunize you against all the potential things that could go wrong. So, is it crazy to be a prepper? In some ways, yes. When taken to violent extremes, where people's fears are perpetuated by disinformation, there's a lot of disinformation out there right now, with respect to conspiracy theory, propaganda, all the rest. Some of it has merit. There's a lot of legitimate criticism of what's mainstream out there. But part and parcel with that, you're going to get a lot of crap too. And there's a lot of people who base their doomsday preparedness around very specific potential outcomes. Whether it's World War III, an EMP, a pandemic, which I think is quite possible down the road, and scientifically speaking, it's inevitable, as many people would say. The robot apocalypse, alien invasion. There's a variety of different global disasters that some people specifically prepare for and bank their lives on. They're really firmly invested in this idea. And you could argue that if you're so invested in an idea, then perhaps you're not fully complete without that idea coming to fruition. Now, I, of course, have analyzed the post-apocalyptic landscape from a variety of different angles. I've considered every possible dimension of what that might look like. And in no way, shape, or form would I ever want that to come to pass just to validate my views. If anything, I hope it would never happen, because no matter how well prepared I was, it would be a very hellish existence. I think one of the things that a lot of really far out preppers think is that, maybe I'm not the top dog in this world, but if I can prepare myself for when the crap hits the fan and everybody else is not going to be prepared, maybe I might come out the alpha in that situation. So there's a lot of people who perhaps might feel that they can achieve after a reset what they weren't able to achieve in life today. And in my past video, I talked about if you can't thrive while the getting's good, while you have all of this technology at your disposal, and you have the system basically to work within, if you can't thrive in that environment, I think that you're probably going to struggle even more to survive, let alone thrive, in a prolonged grid down scenario. It's unrealistic to think that if you can't get up, work 16 hours a day now to make a living and to be prosperous and wealthy, that like hell you're going to be able to do 16 hours in the hot sun out there in the garden or hunting or whatever to try to stay alive post-collapse, standing in line in a FEMA line or something like that. Whatever the case might be, I don't think that you're going to be able to survive, much less thrive in that environment, if you're not maxing out right now while the getting's good, while you have climate control, modern medicine, while you have transportation to get anywhere you want, when you can go and you can make investments in different things, you can start a business, you can work 3 or 4 different jobs if you want to. There's a lot of opportunity out there. If you're not thriving right now, something's wrong. And I think there's a certain inherent laziness to a lot of preppers who are afraid to address certain things in their life that they know they need to change, but perhaps they're hoping that they don't have to change those things and that the world is just going to change. Maybe there's something to that too. So indeed, there's elements of quote unquote crazy But as I've said before, I don't like using that term because to me there's still also something that you need to respect about a person who is preparing for that. They might be crazy, but heaven forbid they're right, because all it takes is for them to be right once for them to not be crazy anymore. So let's remember that at all times. Now, do I think that something is going to happen? You know, there's days that go by where I think that what I'm doing is just a waste of time, to be honest. There are days that go by where I think to myself, man, you know, the grass is green, the sun is shining, you know, people are playing in the park, holding hands, people have plans for the future, everything is moving forward. Nobody's talking about, you know, all the stuff that people on the internet are talking about, like World War III, this, that, whatever. You know, you look outside and you hear crickets, for the most part, in most of our necks of the woods. So at times there's part of me that speaks very tongue-in-cheek when I talk about grid down situations. But don't mistake that for the fact that I understand that this whole thing could unravel very fast. And like I said, it goes back to this very deceptive illusion of order that's been superimposed on the natural world by man with his laws and his social conventions, his agreements, these little micro agreements that we make throughout the day. You know, we're all gonna abide by the stop sign. We're all gonna agree to pay our taxes. All of these little agreements that we've made, at some point they could actually break down and collapse. What keeps me in the preparedness mindset is an awareness that that's an artificial creation. That all of the order and the beauty and the symmetry that you see of modern civilization is artificial. It's man-made. It's not how things necessarily occur in nature. You can liken it to a levee where we as a species are holding back the raging water that is not only nature, but is our own human nature. We're holding back our impulses, our deepest, darkest desires in order to work together, in order to not, you know, kill each other, essentially, in order to coexist with one another. We're holding back a lot of our true intents and desires. And as a result, there's a lot of repressed people walking around, and as a result, you get these crazy mass school shootings and all the rest. That's one theory to explain that kind of behavior. So part of me recognizes that while we're very domesticated, and while most people are very pacified and broken in, that beneath all of that, there's an animal within there. I made a video nearly 2.5 years ago now called The Beast Within. It was one of the first in the After the Collapse series. And I talk all about the pros and cons of human nature, and how you have theories which say that humans are by nature very cooperative, communal-based people who are tribalistic, like to work together towards common goals. And then there's the other view that man is a selfish, individualistic creature who wars with others and attempts to do things for his own gain. And so you have these two opposing views. One is the darker, psychoanalytic, Freudian view that people at their core are animalistic, and that you need society, you need the police, you need the courts in order to suppress our inner animal. And then you have another viewpoint which says that those things coerce the good part of man, that the police and all those things bring out the negative in man, that law and order and those impositions, those restraints that are put on man, you know, what's the William Blake quote, man is free but everywhere he's in chains, or something like that, or mind forged manacles of man. I can't really remember, I'm not really up on my literature, my poetry, but the notion that society, governments, corporations actually use our own fears against us and make us more separate from one another. So the prepper, I think, and I've speculated about this before, that a lot of preppers take the dark human nature view, which in my opinion is quite justified, because a lot of people think that we've changed. They think that throughout the course of the 20th century that morally people have evolved as much as we have technologically, which just is not the case. Maybe we've become more pacified and complacent on the surface, in the sense that we're not willing to stand up for what we believe in because we're too afraid of the consequences, whereas people 300-400 years ago might have stood up against tyranny. I don't think that the Doomsday Prepper has a lot of faith in humanism. What humanism is the understanding that all human beings want is to be happy, that most people would sooner cooperate with one another than live in a world driven by conflict, that it's much easier for us to work together towards common goals than to resist in some way, shape, or form. So there's two conflicting views. So is the Doomsday Prepper crazy? In short, it's a spectrum. To me, there's few mental health conditions which actually could be construed as being borderline insane, and those are the ones which revolve around hallucinations, seeing things that aren't really there. Now, the prepper is preparing something which potentially is very unlikely, but that doesn't mean it can't happen. They're just allotting a disproportionate amount of time to that one potential outcome, which may never come to pass. But then you compare that to the other things in society which people are preoccupied with: vanity, self-image, sporting events, things which have no relevance to the real world or really are going to get them any further in their lives. People are so preoccupied with these things, drugs and alcohol and any other thing that you can be negatively addicted to. So for me to call somebody crazy because they're preparing for something which could really happen, as unlikely as it may be, especially considering that by many skeptical accounts, you could argue what we are doing as a species right now is insane on a variety of different levels. I'm not going to get specific about that because once I do, I get political, and I don't want to ruffle the feathers of all the politically and religiously dogmatic people out there. I hope you can grasp what I'm trying to say. SHTF could happen, and that's why I prep. Do I lose sleep over it? Is it my central preoccupation in life? No. Yes, Canadian prepper is a big part of my life right now, but it's not the only part of my life. It's not what I wake up and think about necessarily. It's not the first thing I think about. While this channel and preparedness is a big part of my life, I'm not somebody who's constantly looking over my shoulder, but I'm realistic about man's potential to commit evil. And when I say evil, I don't want to bring in a bunch of religious connotations. When I say evil, I just mean things which are bad. Like it or not, the golden rule is a sensible rule. Do unto others as you would have do unto yourself. I think that golden rule is for the most part irrefutable. So if you're new to this channel and you're trying to figure out what this channel is about, what this guy's about, I hope that sums it up a little bit. Yes, there's going to be a tinge of post-apocalyptic preparedness to the videos I make. Probably a lot more than a tinge if you're watching the After the Collapse series. I try to hit that from every possible angle. But there's also a lot of practical stuff too. And there's plenty of videos out there on YouTube that are fully submerged into grid-based life, into everything is fine, nothing bad is ever going to happen. There's millions and millions of videos. So I would ask you to allow me, this one little tiny sliver of the internet, to do my thing, to talk about preparedness, and respect it. And know that just because you're a prepper, even if you're a doomsday prepper, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're very crazy. Look, a man can be very intelligent in one respect and very foolish in others. The full-on, I'm going to build a castle in the woods doomsday prepper, you might argue that he's very foolish in the sense that he's banking his entire life savings on this one thing. Fine, if you want to say that, but if you can afford a castle in the woods, then you're probably doing pretty good for yourself, or at least you did at one point. And they can be very wise in the sense that they recognize that society isn't perfect. And they recognize that throughout history, empires have risen and fallen. And that it really is only a matter of time before the reset happens again. And that's not to say that it's going to be the end. That's not to say that people aren't going to rebuild something better, which is usually the case. You know, after the plagues in Europe, after the fires in London, you know, after the Crusades, after any major calamity of a global scale, something good came of that. You know, the Enlightenment came after all of that crap that happened in Europe. So after something really bad tends to come something good. It takes a while to gestate, but eventually birth is something positive. So even if you consider yourself a apocalyptic prepper, doesn't necessarily discount the fact that, hey, maybe something good is going to come down the line, and that's what you're trying to survive long enough until you can get to that point. Whether it's environmental destruction, economic collapse, World War III, EMP, pandemic, volcanoes, natural disasters, whatever the case might be, you want to be there for when things get rebuilt. It's not about surviving the night, it's about rebuilding the next day. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Canadian Prepper out.